Dragon Quest VII is fast approaching in my mind. February is not that far away and we still have questions. The questions are still being asked. Why Dragon Quest VII? Why is it being streamlined? Why is content being cut? And everything else in between. Well, we have an interview with the producer of Dragon Quest VII Reimagined, Takeshi Ichikawa, going over some of the answers to this question, and I want to spend today's video in going over it, so I'm hoping you can join me in today for this one. So with that all being said, what is up guys, Jen here, hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to the channel. If you would like to support my content, please consider hitting that like button, it helps out considerably. And if you want to stick around for some more Dragon Quest content, you're already in the right place, hit that subscribe button. Now the gameplay you are seeing in the background is more gameplay from my exclusive preview of where I got to play Dragon Quest VII Reimagined, and if you want to hear my thoughts and opinions and what you can expect from the actual game, there is a video in the top cards and in the description if you want to check that out. But we are going to be going over this interview and I'll leave a link to this interview in the description as well. So let's dive in. So straight off the bat, the question Takeshi Ichikawa gets asked is, why did you decide to remake Dragon Quest VII now? Because we've just had Dragon Quest III, 1 and 2, and we're diving straight into 7. A lot of people are expecting 4, 5 and 6, starting off with 6, but here we are with 7, with a completely renewed look. And Takeshi Ichikawa answers saying that it came out in the year 2000, we're in its 25th anniversary, but also the fact that Dragon Quest VII is quite a unique game in what it offers. There's things in there that are not seen in any other game in the series, and they thought that it would be quite popular with a modern audience, and that's why they chose to remake it. They prod a little bit further and they ask, why is that? Takeshi Ichikawa answers that he thinks the appeal of Dragon Quest VII is that there's something that you don't find in the rest of the Dragon Quest series, and that is the protagonist, because he's an ordinary protagonist. He's a kid from a village and he's nobody particularly special. He's not a descendant, he's not a prince or anything like that. He's just a normal guy. But you get to see him grow, develop and become more of an adult, and he thinks that's quite unique. They go to then talk about his experience with the game, and he was in primary school back when it came out, so he was very, very young, and he reflects on the fact that Dragon Quest VII, Dragon Warrior 7, for those that did play it on the PlayStation, is a very, very long game, and it takes about 3 hours before you get into your first battle. So for a kid of his age, and I guess if I was ever to play Dragon Quest VII back then, I would probably have the same thought that, man, I'm a little bit bored, what's going off with this game? And I would have gave up halfway through the introduction. So that is one of the reasons why they put a lot of effort into making sure that doesn't happen with Dragon Quest VII Reimagined, which again is great. You addressed something that I have seen before even Dragon Quest VII got announced as the next remake of a Dragon Quest game, that I've seen it all over the place. Dragon Quest VII's intro is insane. Just the game in general is a long game. So from my perspective, seeing that a lot, people should be praising that this is getting this kind of look, and they have altered it to make it much easier to get into. Next question is a big question. How have they streamlined the story of the game? So the idea of how they tweaked the game, particularly the story and the battles, was to improve the tempo, and that was a very big consideration for them. They wanted to keep the feel and the atmosphere of the game as it was in the original, but make it a lot more pacier to play. And the result was to adjust the story, as the story definitely contributed to it being as long as it is. So there were 7 story arcs that they looked in total. 4 of these have being made completely optional, so they're still in the game, but you don't have to do them. So that right there is a good streamlining of the story. There is stuff that they could have just completely removed, those 4 optional things, but they've kept them in, and it's nice to see that they're there. It will keep the game fresh as you're playing through it, and I should imagine that it's going to be fun to discover these in different orders. With the world of Dragon Quest VII ever evolving, maybe something different happens if you tackle one place first than the other, or vice versa. But he goes on to say that Dragon Quest VII is structured like a series of stories, and they've rearranged them. In addition, for the 4 optional scenarios they just mentioned, they had made the decision to cut 3 scenarios in order to construct a new experience that develops more faster and more dense. Now, this is obviously going to have conflicting opinions. Some people are going to be like, hey, I'm all right with those going. Some of them will be like, nah, I really liked what was offered there. And some people were just going to be just in it for the ride and just go into it anyway, like myself. So I'm really interested to hear your opinions on these 3 locations being cut and what your feelings are as someone that may have played the original or played the 3DS version. Me, with someone that's already played the game and seen a preview of the structure of how Dragon Quest VII Reimagined is going to be played, I really got into it quite fast, and I was really happy with all of the accessibility and just the all-in atmosphere that I got when playing it. He then finishes off to say that essentially the main path has been narrowed down, so the story progresses in a nicer, easier to follow manner, but it's not just cuts, they've added new story episodes as well, which means the game's deeper with more density of content. So yes, things are being cut, but the things that are there, they're diving in deeper and maybe pull a few things from those cut sections and interweave it ever so slightly. Then Takeshi Ichikawa was asked, why have you added in this new content if you're cutting other content? And one of the main reasons is to give people more affection for the allied characters in the party, so they've added more episodes focused on the heroes so players can get even more invested in them. And we've seen a preview with that with Kiefer, with him returning much older, so it's nice to see that they're going to be giving more attention to the other characters of Dragon Quest VII and building that relationship with them. He was then asked for an example of new scenarios that he might be excited for new players to discover, and he said, what could I say without spoiling the game? And he goes out and just says, hey, there's one here that looks at the protagonist and his childhood friend Maribel and some of the adventures they had when they were growing up together. And then, of course, they mention the new scenario of which Kiefer becomes an adult. So a small little preview. I like any game that dives into its characters a little bit more, especially an adventure game like Dragon Quest. Having these characters, they did it so well in Dragon Quest II, giving all of the descendants of Erdrick a personality. So I have nothing but faith that the characters are going to be very well written, very well explored, and there's going to be some lovable characters here for people to enjoy. He was then asked if there was a personal favourite scenario of him in Dragon Quest VII Reimagined. He answers that it's actually the opening because, as he mentioned previously, he did not get into it and he ended up giving up halfway through it. The fact that they've reworked it and it's more of an entertaining way to get into the game of battles, it's now his more favourite things about the game. And it's also a very interesting new story in its own right, and it's something that he's definitely looking forward to other people experience. And he finishes off saying that he really enjoyed making that part of the game, and it's always nice to see, especially from producers and people that work on the game, things that they're passionate about and people they really are excited to see reactions for. So I think this opening of Dragon Quest VII is going to be quite different, but same for those that have played it, but different enough to get people really in and invested in what the story is going to be for Dragon Quest VII Reimagined. Next, they talk about the visual style of the game and why they went for a different art style as opposed to something like a HD 2D or just slapping on a new coat of paint on the 3DS version. And he goes to answer that the art style of the Dragon Quest games is based on the original designs by the late Akira Toriyama, and his visual style is very much the basis for Dragon Quest, of which we all love. I love the art style for Dragon Quest in general. But among the Dragon Quest games, the proportions of characters in Dragon Quest VII are shorter. They're much cuter, rounder character designs than the other game series, which is true. We could see that reflected in the 3DS version and of course the artwork of Dragon Quest VII. So they did a number of tests and experiments to see which visual style would really express those proportion characters in game, and they found that there were a number of films and series that use very similar visual style using puppets and dolls, and that they were really well regarded. So they felt that the art style could fit really well with the world and atmosphere of Dragon Quest VII. And I just want to take a moment to just put my thoughts out there. I adore this style. Playing it in front of me in a crisp HD and seeing the way that everything's translated in game and the way that they've made the dioramas of the towns and the monster designs and just the environments to match the doll effect, I think it's glorious, and it makes Dragon Quest VII feel a lot more unique compared to other Dragon Quest games. They then go to ask if there was any other visual styles considered, and they decided on the dolls quite early on, and there were other styles that they looked at, and they were looking at like a more hand-drawn style, but then they were drawn to the handcrafted aesthetic, which I'm glad that they went for, but I'm really interested to maybe that we might see a hand-drawn style Dragon Quest game somewhere down the line. Maybe they might use that for 4, 5, or 6, or even 9. But once they had that idea locked down, there were a lot of different experiments on the doll theme itself to work out which exactly the best one was. Next up, they ask about the top-down aesthetic similar to the original game and why they chose this viewpoint as opposed to the more zoomed-in view of the Nintendo 3DS version of the game. And apparently, there are 2 reasons for that. First is when they decided on using dolls for the characters, they had to think about the best way to approach the backgrounds and environments to fit with that. And they settled on doing it like a scale model diorama style. And that viewpoint zoomed out supports that aesthetic, which makes sense. It looks beautiful. I like the way that the sound and dungeons look in Dragon Quest VII Reimagined. They also experimented with the close-up style, and it made exploration take a little bit longer because you didn't have much of a viewpoint of exploring dungeons and stuff, so having that zoomed out perspective matched the pace that they were looking for Dragon Quest VII Reimagined. Next up, they touch on the gameplay here, and they specifically talk about moonlighting, and they want to explain how this works. We've seen it in previews, I've experienced it myself, but essentially in the original game, you equip each character with a vocation, and it determines their role and abilities in battle. In Dragon Quest VII Reimagined, once you've reached a certain point in the story, you get the option to add a second vocation to the story. And they go on to ask, why did you add this into the game? But they say in the previous versions of Dragon Quest VII, if you maxed out a vocation and moved on to the second one, there was a bit of a dilemma for players because if you changed to another vocation, you had to start leveling it up again from 0, meaning your character would be much weaker. So they introduced the moonlighting system for 2 reasons. First, to solve that issue. It reduces the dilemma of changing vocations and makes it much easier to explore all the different jobs. And the second reason is it helped add feeling of personality and customization. It lets you put your own spin on things by switching vocations and experimenting with different combinations. It gives you a feeling of humanity to the job system, which is 100% true. Like, there's going to be so many combos out there. There's going to be guides once the game's released. There's going to be preferences. Some people might want to do these 2 vocations. Some people might want to do other 2 vocations. It's going to be a good time to experiment with, and it really does open up a little bit of fun and customization with the systems. The next set of questions are more talking about the fan reaction and Dragon Quest in the West, which I'll go to touch on a little bit here. He was asked what he thought of the reaction of the announcement as it was broadcast during a Nintendo Direct, and I think during that Direct, it was one of the forefront that people were talking about, and he was happy to see that. It was getting the #1 trend in Japan, which we would expect no less when it comes to Dragon Quest games. And he goes on to say that the reaction in Europe and America was good, but it wasn't as much as the peak as the Japanese, but even against the first big party Nintendo titles in that show, they managed to get close to getting talked about, which is amazing. Like, they are really trying to push Dragon Quest in the West. We're feeling it. I see more people playing it. I see more people appreciating it. Speaking of Dragon Quest in the West, the next question was, how much visibility do you have into how Dragon Quest is being perceived in the West? And they're aware that Dragon Quest is big in Japan, but it's not quite as high profile in Europe, America, and other places. We do think about that when we develop our games, and we try to make sure that they are accessible and easy to get into for people outside of Japan who don't know them so well. And I think they've done a phenomenal job of doing that by presenting the Erdrick trilogy. Dragon Quest XI was a great one because you could play that as a new player, but if you are someone that has loads of Dragon Quest titles under your belt, you are rewarded for that knowledge and that time you've put into the Dragon Quest games. And I think this is a really good point for people to get into Dragon Quest games, because I think this resurgence is going to continue through 4, 5, and 6. We're going to see 8 again. 9's going to get some love. Heck, let's just put us all down for 10. We want that to be accessible in the West in some shape or form. I would be ready to dive into that. Let's party up and just venture the world of Dragon Quest X. It'd be a blast, but we'll see what their plans are in the future. Next question is talking about if it's important to help more people to discover the Dragon Quest games. And yes, of course they want more people to get into Dragon Quest games. They want to get more younger players and PC gamers playing Dragon Quest games. And that's not just in the West, that's also in Japan. They've worked hard with this particular game, Dragon Quest VII Reimagined, to make sure it works for both types of players, appealing to new fans while it's also satisfying the dedicated and passionate fans that already love the series. And I think they're doing a great job doing that. I really do. For example, they've created a new user interface for the game. Traditionally, Dragon Quest uses a window-based menu system, but they redesigned it for a tab-based system that should feel more familiar and intuitive for PC gamers. So making something that appeals to these groups was something that they put time and effort into. And someone that has gone through these menus, it's very easy. It's not far removed from the old school style box menus, and it's very much welcomed from myself. And the last and final question to Takeshi Ichikawa was, what are you most excited for fans to discover? And he answers, new players will find a well-placed, exciting story that's accessible and fun to play. For fans that know the story or played Dragon Quest VII before, there are a number of ways of which we change things up. We've reworked the story, gone deeper on many things. So those players will go, oh, that's interesting, that's new and different. And he really hopes that everybody enjoys it. And just going over this interview and meeting Takeshi Ichikawa myself, I can see that he is really putting his heart into this reimagining of Dragon Quest VII, and he really is keen for people to get into this one. And I can see it. I really can see it. So let me know in the comment section down below, how excited are you for Dragon Quest VII? Again, check out my preview down below of me actually playing the game and my thoughts, my opinions, and all little things that you might want to know about the game before it comes out next year, February. Oh man, I am ready. I appreciate your time, and until next time, I'll catch you on the flip side.